Even all these years later, it still remains one of my favorite shows of all time, and what I see as the crowning example of world building. It's really the result of an incredibly intelligent design, a design that we can also learn from. So after digging into the other Avatar last week, the one with the blue people in it, let's dig through the world of Avatar, layer by layer. You see, this layered approach is a practical blueprint that I call the layered world engine, starting with the core rule that governs everything. We'll see how that creates a system layer of physical laws, then a social layer of cultures, and a political layer of power struggles. Finally, we'll look at the pressure layer, where conflict truly ignites into story. By the end, you won't just appreciate Avatar on a deeper level. You'll have a powerful framework to apply to your own creative projects. See, every great world is built on a single, unbreakable truth that serves as its sort of constitution. You see, this is the first and most critical step because this is the foundation from which all power and conflict and meaning will eventually grow from. This is our layer one, the core rule. In Avatar, that rule is the thing that's repeated to us at the beginning of every opening of Avatar. That rule is power in this world comes from bending one of four elements, and balance between these powers is the natural order of things. This is the bedrock. Once you see this as the absolute law of the universe, everything else starts to click more into place. Without it, the world has no internal logic. And this is where Aang becomes more than a protagonist. He's not just a kid learning powers, as much as he's the living embodiment of the world's core rule. And this is proven when that character disappears, because the entire world breaks. The Fire Nation's war is no longer just some generic conquest. Because of that core rule, what the Fire Nation does is this catastrophic disruption of natural order. See, the quiet brilliance here is that the creators didn't just invent some really cool magic system. They established a core philosophy for their universe, and from which everything else from the story extends from. This philosophy is personified by the Avatar, whose entire purpose is to maintain that balance. Think about when Aang enters the Avatar state and connects with his past lives, whether it's Roku or Kyoshi. He isn't just getting some major power-up when he goes to the Avatar state. He's kind of plugging into a living history that embodies that central rule that we've been talking about. The entire existence of the Avatar is to be the living embodiment of this rule. So here's how to apply it for you. For your own world, the practical technique is to define your rule in a single, clear sentence. In Hollywood, we do something similar with log lines, but this is more about the core of the world you are building. To find it, ask yourself, what is the one idea that, if removed, would make the entire story meaningless? Is your world's fundamental force magic, technology, divinity, or something else entirely? Is the natural state of your world harmony, or is it chaos? Your rule should be the answer. This becomes essentially your North Star for your story, so try testing it. If your entire world and its story fall apart when you remove this one idea, you've found your foundation. So now we have our foundation, the philosophical bedrock of your world. But an abstract rule doesn't create a story. It's just kind of a statement. For that rule to have any sort of meaning, it really needs to have real physical consequences. It has to govern the very laws of nature in your world, dictating what is possible and isn't possible. That's where the creators did something genius, grounding their fantasy in a way that feels very credible. This brings us to layer 2, the system layer. Think about Katara having to carry her water in her pouch. It's a really small detail that establishes a huge rule. A waterbender needs an external source. Think about when we see her desperate in the Siwang Desert, surviving only on water in that small bag. This limitation feels real. And then you realize their power is tied to the moon, a detail that becomes a massive critical plot point in the Siege of the North. We feel the collective dread as the moon turns blood red and every waterbender in the city suddenly falls. The water literally falls out of the air. The waves stop in the ocean. What that shows us is that it's a direct consequence of the system, and that system connects to the core. So the craft move is to define the power and the price. The creators ensure every power has a source, a limit, and a critical weakness. For example, as Iroh teaches, firebending is generated from within using chi, making the Fire Nation uniquely self-sufficient. But that power is tied to the sun. During a solar eclipse, they're rendered basically powerless. a crucial weakness that becomes the entire basis for an invasion plan. And I have to geek out about Toph inventing metal bending. It feels like this shocking, game-changing moment, but it's not a cheat to the world. We feel her desperation in that metal box, and we hear the captors outside, and they're mocking her. You know, even you can't bend metal. And then we see her focus, seeing with her senses to find the unrefined earth within the steel. It's a perfect, logical extension of the established system, and one of my favorite moments because it shows the system is robust enough to be able to innovate without breaking the world. So how to use it for your story? Well, the practical exercise here is a power and price chart. For every key element of your core rule, define its source, its limitations, and its Achilles heel. And you can kind of go through this step by step. First, list the powers that come from your rule. Second, define their source. Where do they come from? Third, establish their limitations. What can't they do? And fourth, determine their cost or weakness. What is the price for using this power? Even the avatar state has its limitations. It puts Aang in a completely vulnerable state that, if killed, would break the avatar cycle. When you define the cost of power, you create instant stakes and force your characters to be clever. By the way, if you're building your own world and you want more tools like this 5-layer engine, I've got more breakdowns coming this month, so hit subscribe so you don't miss them. Let's move on to layer 3. This is where the real magic happens. Once you defined your physical laws of the world, the powers and their prices, something incredible begins to emerge. People have to live within these laws, days in and days out. Their daily routines, their jobs, their very survival becomes shaped by these systems and abilities. And over generations, those routines harden into something much deeper: culture, and how it really ensures your societies feel authentic and inevitable to your story. So it's time to explore layer 3, the social layer. This is where the creators show their genius with the craft move of culture from physics, basically. They ensure every cultural value is a reflection of how bending shapes daily existence. Take the air nomads, for example. Of course they're spiritual, detached, and live in remote temples high in the mountains. Their element gives them total freedom of movement, an existence separated from the ground below. You can feel their philosophy in the architecture of the temples, open to the sky and winds. Their philosophy is born from their element. Then on the other end, you have the industrial Fire Nation, with its jagged black steel warships and nationalist ambition, a society that values drive because their power literally comes from within, like the chi that we mentioned earlier. Their capital city is built in the crater of a volcano, with imposing angular architecture that communicates power and control. In contrast, the massive Earth Kingdom is defined by substance and endurance, reflected in these impossibly huge walls of cities like Ba Sing Se, and a philosophy of stoic resilience. I mean, seriously, how stubborn is Toph, for example? The very architecture tells you everything you need to know about their values, all born from their connection to the Earth. So how can we use this for your world? So here's a creative exercise. It's a sort of what-if game, but you're acting like a sociologist. Take one rule from your system layer, and then ask a chain of questions from there. First, how would this rule affect where and how people live? Second, what jobs, hierarchies, and daily routines would emerge? Third, what core values would these routines create over generations? Fourth, how would those values manifest in everything from their architecture and art to their family structure and even religious beliefs? When you start to connect your system to your society this way, your world starts to feel lived in. So now we have these incredible, distinct cultures, each one this sort of perfect, logical expression of their element. The spiritual air nomads, the resilient Earth Kingdom, the ambitious Fire Nation, the isolated water tribes. They're all living on the same planet, each with their own values and resources and sense of identity. Now, what happens next should feel inevitable. When you have different groups with different needs and different ideologies sharing your world, you're gonna get friction. The social layer naturally gives birth to layer 4, the political layer. In Avatar, the political landscape is a direct consequence of all the layers beneath it. What really clicked for me was realizing Firelord Sozin's imperialist ideology isn't really random, as much as it grew from his nation's systemic advantage, the ability to create their own energy from their chi. In his youth, he spoke to Roku of sharing the Fire Nation's prosperity, an idea that's twisted into a political belief in their own superiority and a divine mandate to rule. Instead of in this sort of altruistic sense, it becomes this sort of, oh, we're better than everybody. Their authoritarian monarchy is a structure perfectly mirroring this focused, top-down nature of their power. Without this layer, the 100-Year War would lack real ideological stakes. It would just sort of be a war for territory, not really the fight over the world's soul. Well, the craft move here is to build a political engine. The Earth Kingdom's sprawling, decentralized monarchy struggles with cohesion, which we see firsthand in the bureaucratic rot of Ba Sing Se, how bad actors can come in and disrupt, how you get these different people vying for power, controlling information because of how spread out they are. The Water Tribe's politics are defined by their isolation. The North becomes insular, while the South's political structure kind of collapsed under constant raids. And even the Avatar itself is a political force. The moment Aang disappeared, it created a century-long power vacuum that the Fire Nation exploited. This was the opening that they needed. The entire global conflict hinges on the absence of this single political and spiritual peacekeeper. So how do you use this for your story? Well, the task for this layer is to put your societies on a map and ask, what ideology would they naturally develop based on their social values? How would they govern themselves? What do they want from their neighbors, resources, territories, or to convert them ideologically? Where will those desires inevitably clash? All right, everyone, now the stage is set. We have our physical laws, our distinct cultures, and a political engine humming with tension and these competing ideologies. The world is now a complex, breathing machine, but now it's time to incite a story. To get a story, you need to apply pressure. Might be the word I use more than anything on this channel, but pressure. You need a catalyst, an event so massive that it pushes your entire world to its breaking point and reveals its deepest flaws. This is where the plot truly ignites. It's time to light the fuse with layer 5, the pressure layer. The 100-Year War is the ultimate pressure test for this world. It's a global disaster born from a century of imbalance. In fact, the 100-Year War isn't just a result of Fire Nation ambition. It's the result of missing the stabilizer. Aang's absence creates the conditions to make that war inevitable. Well, the craft move here is the stress test. The war's first act, the Air Nomad Genocide, was a strategic political decision to eliminate the next Avatar. Sozin didn't choose this for no reason at all. He chose it so that the cycle would have to reset, that a new Avatar would be chosen, and they would be an infant, meaning that he would go unresisted as he begins his conquest. This act was made possible by the event of Sozin's Comet, which basically supercharged Fire Nation's power to an overwhelming degree. It basically allowed them to attack all 4 temples at once with overwhelming fire and might. This pressure is what forges the story. The Fire Nation becomes increasingly militarized. The Earth Kingdom's size becomes a liability, creating refugee crises and bad actors coming into the story. Kantara and Sokka are forged by the loss of their mother in a targeted raid on the Southern Benders. This is also where you get some of the most memorable and terrifying parts of the show. Think about Hama and the invention of bloodbending. That doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's what happens when you take a master bender, lock her in her cage where she's deprived of all water, and push her to her absolute breaking point under horrific imprisonment. In her desperation, she's forced to find the water inside the body of her enemy. It's kind of this chilling, unforgettable consequence of the world being put under stress. So how do you apply this to your world? Well, your final step is to apply this stress test. Brainstorm a catalyst, a war, a plague, a technological disruption, a prophecy, then ask how this event puts pressure on every layer you built. How does it stress test the physical system? How does it crack societies apart? How does it upend the political order? And how does it affect your character? And what are they going to do? And that's how you get a story that feels earned. When you take one final step back and look at the complete blueprint we've uncovered, you can see the whole picture. The 5 layers of world building that make Avatar: The Last Airbender feel so consequential and lasting. Using our layered world engine, it all starts with a simple, powerful core rule. From there, a system layer defines the physical mechanics of that power. This gives rise to the social layer, where distinct cultures build around those systems. Those societies then create a political layer with ideologies that lead to conflict. And finally, the pressure layer, stress test that entire structure, generating the story itself. It's this beautiful chain of cause and effect. For any writer, start with your unbreakable rule, then build outward, layer by layer. Let your systems create your societies create your politics, and let the pressure ignite your story. When you do that, you're not just designing a setting as much as you're building a world that feels like it has its own history, its own logic, its own soul. And once again, I'm Brian, this is Plot Luck. And if you've ever loved a story, felt let down by one, or dreamed of telling your own, pull up a chair, hit subscribe, and let's stir the plot together. That's a wrap.